Hello church, nice to see you again. I hope you've had a lovely Easter. We're back with our next chapter of Daniel, which is Daniel chapter 8. We are getting into some very confusing visions, and I did wonder about whether we should change and do a simpler book, and then I thought if we don't do it, we'll never understand it. So let's try. So apologies if I make any mistakes, and I hope that you do check up to make sure I'm doing it correctly. And I thought I'm going to ask my three friends here to help me with this chapter because it does get very confusing. So in this chapter, Daniel has a vision. Okay, so far so good. And in the vision, there is a two-horned ram. Now I don't have a ram. What I've got is a reindeer, but very helpfully, he's got two horns. So he's going to be my ram. And the ram charges other beasts to the north, the west, and the south, and overcomes them all. Okay, so far so good. He is triumphant and is totally in control. Now, the chapter of Daniel has the vision and then the explanation, but I'm going to explain it as I go because I think that is a little bit simpler. So the explanation is that these two horns represent the Medes and the Persians. The Persian one came up a little bit later and was a little bit bigger, but basically the empire of the Medes and Persians was going to spread and spread and spread. And this actually happened. So Daniel's prophecy is true so far, okay? So you've got the empire of the Medes and Persians that has overcome all else. And then you have a ram with one large horn. Now I don't have a ram, I've got a sheep. As you can imagine, I'm Welsh, I like sheep. The ram comes with its one large horn and boofs over the Medes and the Persians. Now this is the Greek Empire. And the horn, we think, is Alexander the Great. He acted very quickly, he was very young, and he immediately got a lot of power and won a lot of battles against the Medes and Persians in about the year 350 BC, maybe slightly before that. So the next thing we have is the ram with the one horn that takes over. Okay. Then it says that the horn broke off and instead, there we go, there were 4 other horns that sprouted up. This is why pipe cleaners are brilliant. I don't know if you can see this because it's white against the background, but here we go, 2 here and another 2. So the Greek Empire that was under Alexander the Great was defeated while he was still, I think he was in his 30s. If there's any history buffs in our church, they can check that for me. And then his kingdom was fragmented into 4 parts, and that was what has happened in the dream. 4 separate horns sprouted up instead of the one great horn. And then it says that from one of these horns rose a smaller horn that grew and grew and grew. I'm just going to twist this round here. Okay, and the rest of the vision is all about this extra horn that's grown off one of the horns. So we've seen the Medes and the Persians rise up, and then we've seen Alexander the Great take over, and then his kingdom is fragmented into 4, and finally we've got this 5th horn, but it's not going to stand up, but this 5th horn that's grown off from one of the previous horns. And the rest of the vision is about this horn. Okay, so far so good? Okay, so this horn represents somebody who called himself Theos, which I think might be the Greek word for God, and he did set himself up like a god. His name was Theos Antiochus Epiphanes. You can check this, I think it's in Exodus 29. And he was a horrible, evil man. He hated the Jews and everything to do with God. So he ransacked their temples and he used the altars to slaughter pigs on, which of course was awful for the Jews. And then he had human sacrifices as well on their altars. So just, yes, a very, very evil man. He banned them from circumcising their children. I don't know how you feel about that, but he was very anti it, and he also refused to let them adhere to the Sabbath and forced them to work on the Sabbath. So not a great guy, and that is what this horn represents. It says that it went up, it grew up into the heavens, and knocked down the starry hosts, and that the truth fell to the ground, says truth here, and was trampled under his feet. And to be honest, that's pretty much where the dream ends. So a really lovely dream for Daniel there. And then it says that Daniel was appalled by the vision, and he was exhausted, so he slept for 4 days, and then he continued about his business. So a lovely dream for us in Daniel chapter 8. So there were things that I thought of from this passage, and the first one is Daniel lived in a time of great conflict, and God spoke into that time. God gave him a knowledge of the future, and it was not going to be good. And the conflict wasn't just earthly conflict, it was conflict on a cosmic scale, a struggle between God's kingdom and the kingdoms of man. And the thing that Daniel always took from these visions is all of the kingdoms on earth. God doesn't really care, well, he does care, but he's not set up with the idea of where the boundaries are and how life looks. He cares about how we honour him. And the kings that don't honour him, they do all eventually fall. And sometimes there is a load of horrible things that happen first, but none of those kingdoms can stand in the days that God's kingdom comes. So that was number one. There's only one real survivor. The only kingdom that will last is God's kingdom. And then the other thing I thought of was the fact that knowing the future doesn't always bring us joy. It doesn't always bring us security. And at the moment, we don't know what our future looks like, and that's okay. It's okay that we don't know when the lockdown's going to end. We don't know when we're going to be able to meet as a church again. We don't know what is to come. Sometimes trusting in God is just as easy when you don't know the future as when you do, because sometimes the future isn't great. But the reality is that we've got a God that we can live and that we can trust, and isn't like these horrible kingdoms that have come before. His kingdom is one that brings us hope and that brings us joy. I was talking to Alan Emery about some of these visions and how difficult it was going to be to think about them, and he made a really good point that has stayed with me. He was talking about all of these different beasts that turn up in these visions and how horrible they are and how overwhelming they seem. And at the moment we've got a very tiny beast that we can't quite see that is attacking us, this coronavirus that is spreading and killing people. And actually when you think about the cosmic battle between heaven and earth and the kingdoms and the sin that is there, it makes you realise how insignificant even these great beasts that seem so horrifying are, how insignificant we are, and how glorious our God is. And I hope that that isn't a scary thing, but that is something that brings you a real sense of security in knowing that our place and our existence isn't reliant on the kingdoms of earth and the powers of earth. Our hope and our existence is secure in one who is all-powerful and all-knowing, and who ultimately holds us all in his hands. So have a lovely rest of your day. I hope you don't mind me carrying on with Daniel. I think it is going to be worth it just to have done it once, and I promise we'll go back to easier things once we've got through Daniel. Okay, have a lovely day. Bye.